The morning sun had barely risen over the Chesapeake Bay, casting a pale golden glow on the towering gates of the U.S. Naval Academy. The usual crisp orderliness of the campus was in full swing, cadets jogging in perfect lines, their uniforms immaculate, voices echoing in unison, the scent of salt and polished metal lingering in the air. It was a routine day, the kind that passed unnoticed unless something unusual happened. And that's precisely when she appeared. She walked alone, a solitary figure against the backdrop of immaculate lawns and historic brick buildings. She carried a duffel bag that had clearly seen decades of travel. Its leather corners were worn, and a few patches were frayed, but the bag was meticulously packed. Her clothes were simple plain slacks, a crisp white blouse, a neutral jacket, but her posture and the way she moved spoke volumes. She walked with an authority that made people turn their heads, though she was dressed in civilian attire. The gate cadet, a fresh-faced young man named Thomas, instinctively straightened as she approached. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely, his hand hovering near the radio clipped to his belt. "Good morning," she replied, her voice calm, steady, and warm, but with an unmistakable undercurrent of command. "I need to see Captain Douglas immediately. Please inform him of my arrival." Thomas hesitated, glancing around at the other cadets milling nearby. A visitor wasn't unusual, but there was something about her. He noticed how other cadets, passing by, slowed their pace and stole glances at her. Whispers began to float in the crisp morning air. "Who is she?" One muttered under his breath. "Never seen her before," another replied. "Maybe some journalist?" But the woman didn't move like a journalist. She didn't carry a notebook or camera. Her gaze swept across the training grounds with a quiet assessment, lingering just long enough to seem both familiar and detached. She radiated calm, yet there was a latent tension about her, as if she had stood on the decks of battleships and walked through foreign ports, commanding the attention of dozens of officers at a time. Inside the lobby of the academy, she placed her duffel bag gently on the polished floor, its aged leather scuffing softly against the tile. She waited. Thomas, unsure how to proceed, called the captain's office on the radio, his voice betraying a touch of nervousness. "Captain Douglas, we have a visitor. She requests to see you immediately," he said, glancing back at her as if seeking reassurance. Within minutes, a few cadets had gathered near the lobby doors, drawn by curiosity and the subtle aura of authority surrounding the woman. Among them were Ryan and Cooper, two cadets notorious for their mischief, always eager to poke fun at strangers or test the boundaries of the academy's rules. "What's she doing here?" Ryan whispered, leaning toward Cooper. "She doesn't even look like someone from the Navy." "She's not wearing a uniform," Cooper muttered. "Maybe she's a visiting professor?" Ryan smirked. "Bet there's something interesting in that bag. Let's check it out when she's distracted." As they whispered, the woman glanced up briefly, meeting their eyes. Her look was calm but measured, the kind of gaze that could pierce through bravado and leave even the boldest cadets unsettled. Ryan and Cooper exchanged uneasy glances, but shrugged, dismissing the feeling. After all, she was just a civilian, so they thought. The woman, for her part, remained still, almost statuesque, while other cadets passed her by. Her presence wasn't imposing. It was commanding. Each cadet that noticed her felt an odd tug of respect, a fleeting sense that she belonged somewhere they could only dream of, even though they didn't know her rank or role. She took out a small notebook from her bag, flipped it open, and jotted a note. No one could hear the words, but her movements were deliberate, disciplined. Every gesture was purposeful. After several minutes, Thomas returned, motioning politely for her to follow. "Captain Douglas will see you now, ma'am," he said, trying to mask the curiosity in his voice. She nodded slightly, picking up her duffel bag with one hand and walking beside him. The hallway seemed quieter than usual, the echo of her footsteps resonating more than those of the cadets who passed every day. It wasn't arrogance, it was presence. And that presence unsettled Ryan and Cooper, enough that they found themselves stealing glances at her as she passed. "She's something else," Ryan muttered. "I've never seen anyone like her." Cooper's brow furrowed. "Yeah, but why is she here, and why all that stuff in her bag?" As the woman reached the captain's office, she paused. Her hand hovered over the polished wooden doorframe, and then she stepped inside. Cadets outside the door felt an invisible shift in the air. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was reverent. Something about the way she entered, the subtle command in her posture, made it clear that she was no ordinary visitor. Inside, Captain Douglas looked up from his desk. His brow furrowed at first, then softened as recognition hit. His hand rose automatically, and his posture straightened. "Fleet Admiral Monroe, ma'am," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and disbelief. Outside the office, Ryan and Cooper glanced at each other, uneasy and curious. Their instincts screamed that this woman was far more than she appeared, yet they didn't know how right they were. In that moment, the Academy's morning routine was suspended. The usual cadence of drill orders, running cadets, and disciplined footsteps seemed to fade into the background. A single figure, an unassuming, yet undeniably powerful woman had arrived, carrying nothing but an old duffel bag. And unbeknownst to the cadets, she carried far more than that. Decades of naval experience, countless missions, and a story that would leave the Academy forever changed. As she waited calmly in the captain's office, outside, the cadets whispered, the tension building. They had no idea that the next moments would teach them a lesson they would never forget, one that would reshape their understanding of respect, authority, and the unseen weight of true leadership. And so, the stranger's arrival marked the beginning of an unforgettable morning at the Naval Academy. A morning that would challenge assumptions, test courage, and reveal the extraordinary within the ordinary. The hallway outside Captain Douglas's office hummed with the usual background noise of a Naval Academy morning shoes clicking on polished tile, distant whistles signaling training schedules, the low murmur of cadets moving between drills. Yet for Ryan and Cooper, the world had narrowed to a single point, the duffel bag that belonged to the mysterious woman who had just entered the captain's office. "She's gone in," Ryan whispered, glancing nervously down the hall. "Now's our chance. Nobody's watching." Cooper swallowed hard. "I don't know, man. Something about her. She doesn't feel ordinary. And that look she gave us." His voice trailed off, fear tugging at his curiosity. Ryan rolled his eyes. "Relax, it's just a bag. Probably some paperwork or old junk. We're cadets, we see everything. Besides, it's not like she's a fleet admiral or anything, right?" He chuckled nervously, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the zipper. The bag sat on the floor, heavy and slightly scuffed from years of use. Its worn leather smelled faintly of seawater and oil, a scent that hinted at journeys across oceans, of storms endured and ports visited. Ryan unfastened the zipper slowly, as if each movement might trigger some unseen consequence. Inside, they saw documents neatly stacked, some stamped confidential, others embossed with the insignia of the U.S. Fleet Command. There was a folded American flag, crisp and carefully tucked into a corner, and a metal case engraved with an eagle clutching a trident, an emblem they didn't recognize, but instinctively felt carried weight. Cooper leaned closer, his eyes widening. "Dude, what is all this?" "I don't know, man. But this isn't just paperwork," Ryan said, a hint of awe in his voice. This belongs to someone important. Really important." As they rifled through the bag, The faint sound of the woman's footsteps echoed from the hall outside. Their hearts skipped. They froze mid-motion, eyes darting to the doorway. The duffel bag suddenly felt heavier, almost alive with a presence that demanded respect. And then she was there. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She simply entered the hallway, her eyes locking onto theirs. Ryan and Cooper's stomachs dropped. The calm authority in her gaze was disarming. It wasn't anger, they hadn't provoked that, but a quiet, undeniable command that made them feel painfully small. "You've been going through my bag," she said, her voice calm, precise, and almost surgical in its effect. The words carried a weight that made both cadets shrink back instinctively. Ryan's mouth opened, then closed. Cooper's eyes widened. I'm sorry, ma'am," Ryan stammered, the words barely audible. Her gaze lingered for a moment, scanning them like an officer inspecting recruits. There was no anger in her face, only disappointment. And somehow, that was worse. "Apologies are noted," she said finally, voice steady. "But actions speak louder than words. You will carry this bag to Captain Douglas. Now." The two cadets exchanged a panicked glance, but moved to obey, their previous bravado completely dissolved. The metal case, the neatly stacked files, and the folded flag were heavier than they expected, but neither of them dared complain. As they walked beside her, the silence was almost suffocating. Each step echoed, not just on the polished floors, but in the cavernous emptiness of their confidence. They had imagined a rebellious prank, perhaps even a laugh at the mysterious stranger's expense. Instead, every nerve in their bodies screamed that they were in the presence of someone far beyond their comprehension. Ryan's thoughts raced. Who is she? Why is she here? And why do I feel like we've just walked into something we can't control? Cooper's mind worked in parallel. She's not just a visitor. I don't know. She's commanding respect without even asking for it. There's power here I can't touch. The duffel bag felt heavier with each step. Its weight was more than physical. It carried history, authority, and experience. Ryan dared a glance at her, noticing the faint lines on her face, the calm precision of her movements, the slight tilt of her chin. She wasn't young, but there was no question she had commanded crews, navigated storms, and faced situations the cadets couldn't even imagine. When they reached Captain Douglas's office, the cadets hesitated at the door. She didn't speak. She simply nodded, a subtle gesture of patience, urging them forward. Ryan placed the bag gently on the floor. Cooper, his hands still shaking, stepped back. The door opened, and the captain looked up from his desk. The room seemed ordinary at first glance, maps of naval operations, a few models of ships, the hum of fluorescent lights, but the atmosphere shifted as soon as he saw her. Recognition sparked in his eyes, followed by an abrupt, automatic straightening of his posture. "Fleet Admiral Monroe, ma'am," he exclaimed, his voice a mix of astonishment and respect. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Ryan and Cooper froze, jaws slack. Fleet Admiral? The term sounded alien, heavy with history and achievement. The woman standing calmly in front of them, the same one whose bag they had just rifled through, was the highest-ranking officer in the U.S. Navy. Admiral Monroe's expression softened slightly as she returned the salute, her movements precise and dignified. She wasn't angry at the cadets, at least not visibly, but the weight of her presence was enough to make them feel like children caught misbehaving before a teacher of legendary authority. The room fell into silence. The only sound was the faint rustle of papers and the quiet breathing of cadets, still reeling from the revelation. For Ryan and Cooper, time seemed suspended. The mistake they had made, driven by curiosity and youthful arrogance, suddenly carried the gravity of disrespect towards someone who had dedicated a lifetime to service, strategy, and leadership. "Step back," Admiral Monroe said finally, her voice soft yet commanding. "Let this be a lesson, not just about respect for rank, but respect for presence, for experience, and for the unknown." The cadets obeyed without hesitation. Their earlier fear of punishment had shifted to awe. They didn't yet fully understand who she was, nor the scope of her accomplishments, but the impact was undeniable. The metal case, the neatly folded flag, the carefully arranged documents, they were more than objects. They were symbols of a life dedicated to service, courage, and duty. As Admiral Monroe addressed Captain Douglas, Ryan and Cooper exchanged a silent look. They understood now that this was no ordinary inspection. The morning had transformed from mundane to unforgettable. They had glimpsed the edge of greatness, and it had left them humbled, intimidated, and strangely inspired. The woman's calm, commanding presence lingered in their minds long after the conversation ended. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't struck fear through shouting or physical intimidation. She had done something far more profound, she had reminded them. Through a single look, a single word, and a single step, that true authority cannot be assumed. It must be recognized, respected, and ultimately understood. As the cadets stepped out of the office, carrying their lesson with them, the duffel bag remained in Admiral Monroe's care, more than a mere collection of items. It represented decades of history, a life of service, and a narrative of resilience and leadership that no cadet could ever ignore. Outside, the academy continued its morning routine, unaware that a simple visit had transformed the very essence of the day. Ryan and Cooper walked back to their duties, heads bowed slightly, the weight of curiosity replaced with a profound sense of respect. They had glimpsed greatness, and they would never forget it. The office air was thick with unspoken tension. Outside, the polished corridors of the Naval Academy carried the familiar rhythm of drill and duty. Yet inside Captain Douglas's office, time seemed to slow. Ryan and Cooper stood frozen, the weight of their misjudgment pressing down on them. The duffel bag rested on the floor, an unassuming object holding decades of naval history, yet it felt impossibly heavy. Admiral Monroe's eyes scanned the cadets slowly, deliberately. There was no trace of anger on her face, only a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any reprimand. Her gaze wasn't merely evaluating. It was assessing character, integrity, and the very essence of their respect or lack thereof. "Gentlemen," she said softly, her voice calm yet authoritative, "do you understand why your actions were wrong?" Ryan swallowed hard, shifting on his feet. "Yes, ma'am," he stammered. His voice sounded smaller than usual, the bravado he had carried just moments ago evaporating under her measured scrutiny. Cooper nodded silently, eyes fixed on the floor. He could feel the weight of her experience pressing down not physically, but morally. It was an invisible force, a silent reminder that she had faced battles far beyond their comprehension. Admiral Monroe didn't speak immediately after their answers. She let the silence linger, giving them time to feel the magnitude of their error. Then she stepped closer, her posture erect but unthreatening, the precision of her movements revealing decades of discipline. "You assume that because I am not in uniform, I am not a person of authority," she said slowly, each word deliberate, "that my appearance defines my rank, my value, or my capability. That assumption, though unspoken, is one of the greatest mistakes anyone can make, especially in an institution built on discipline, respect, and trust." The cadets exchanged guilty glances. Ryan's fingers fidgeted nervously with the edges of his uniform sleeve, while Cooper's jaw clenched as he struggled to absorb the weight of her words. Admiral Monroe continued, her tone steady but softening slightly. "Respect is earned, not assumed. And authority is not always visible in uniform or insignia. Sometimes it comes quietly, without fanfare, through actions, decisions, and the integrity of one's service." Ryan felt his stomach twist. He had imagined this encounter ending with a reprimand, maybe some demerits. Instead, he was being schooled, not just about military protocol, but about life itself. She reached down and picked up the duffel bag with a single hand, lifting it as easily as if it weighed nothing. Her other hand rested lightly on the edge of the captain's desk. The metal case inside caught the sunlight filtering through the window, gleaming faintly. Ryan and Cooper noticed, almost instinctively, the care with which she handled it. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, and filled with a reverence that made them realize this was more than a mere bag. It was a symbol of decades of commitment, honor, and sacrifice. I have carried this bag across oceans, through storms, and into places where courage was the only currency, she said quietly, almost as if speaking to herself. Then her eyes swept back to the cadets. And yet, you treated it as if it were a curiosity, a plaything to be rifled through. You understand now why that matters? Ryan swallowed, nodding rapidly. Yes, ma'am, he said. His voice carried sincerity he hadn't felt in years, raw and unpolished. Cooper's response was silent, but equally earnest, his eyes wide with awe. Admiral Monroe's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of amusement, but of recognition. She could see that they were beginning to grasp the lesson, the subtle power of integrity and humility. She straightened, glancing briefly at Captain Douglas, who had remained silent, observing the interaction. Then she turned back to the cadets. Humility is the foundation of leadership. Pride without discipline is useless, and curiosity without respect is dangerous. You have a chance to learn now. Whether you take it is your choice. The room seemed charged with an almost palpable energy. Ryan felt his heart pounding, realizing that this was no ordinary lecture. The words weren't merely about obedience or rules. They were about understanding the weight of responsibility and the consequences of underestimating those who serve silently and powerfully. You've peeked into a world you do not understand, Admiral Monroe continued, her voice unwavering. This bag represents decades of service, missions accomplished, lives led, and decisions made that none of you have yet imagined. Today, you have been given a glimpse of that world, and you have been humbled. Let that lesson stay with you. Cooper's mind raced. He thought of the cadets' usual bravado, the pranks, the jokes. All of it seemed trivial now. He realized that this woman had stood where they could only dream of standing commanding fleets, making decisions with consequences that spanned oceans, nations, and lives. Ryan, meanwhile, felt an unfamiliar sensation respect, mingled with fear and awe. He had seen authority in uniform, in medals and insignia, but he had never felt authority like this. Quiet, commanding, unyielding, earned through action, not appearance. Admiral Monroe placed the bag on the desk carefully, patting it as if acknowledging its history. Leadership is not performed for the applause of others, she said softly. It is carried in silence, in the choices you make, and in the responsibility you shoulder when no one is watching. Do you understand that? The cadets nodded, the weight of her words sinking deep into their consciousness. For the first time in their academy lives, they were not thinking about grades, promotions, or social standing. They were thinking about what it meant to serve, to respect, and to lead. Finally, she turned to Captain Douglas. I will be conducting my observation here for the day, she said, her tone shifting seamlessly from admonition to command. Ensure these cadets understand the lesson fully. Their development as officers depends on it. The captain nodded, still visibly awed by her presence. Yes, ma'am, he replied. Ryan and Cooper shuffled back, unable to speak, each lost in their own thoughts. The lesson had penetrated deeper than any classroom lecture, deeper than any punishment could have. They had glimpsed a life forged through challenges they could scarcely imagine. And they were beginning to understand that respect was not about fear, it was about recognition of worth. experience, and integrity. As Admiral Monroe continued speaking to the captain about academy routines, the cadets took a step back and quietly left the office, their minds racing. The morning sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the polished floors, the walls lined with plaques, and the cadets' own reflection in the glass. They were changed already, though they couldn't fully articulate how. In the quiet moments that followed, Ryan whispered to Cooper, I don't think I've ever met anyone like her. Not in my life. Cooper nodded solemnly. Yeah. And I don't think I ever will again. She's something else. The duffel bag remained in the Admiral's care, but its contents, the story of a lifetime of service, were now etched into the minds of two cadets who had thought themselves clever and daring. For the first time, they realized that authority could exist unseen, respected silently, and commanded without a word raised in anger. The quiet power of Admiral Monroe lingered in the office, long after she had moved on. The cadets understood, finally, that true leadership was not about rank or uniform. It was about presence, integrity, and the unshakable certainty of one who had faced the storms of life and emerged stronger, wiser, and unbowed. And outside, the academy continued its drills, its routines, its cadence of discipline. Yet for Ryan and Cooper, and for the unseen presence of Admiral Monroe, the world had shifted irrevocably. They had been taught a lesson that would follow them through every drill, every challenge, and every decision they would make in their careers. This was the beginning of understanding that authority is not always announced, greatness is not always visible, and true respect is earned in ways that the unobservant never see. The door to Captain Douglas's office clicked shut behind the two cadets, leaving the room with an air of tense expectation. The silence wasn't merely absence of sound, it was the weight of history, authority, and unspoken respect pressing down on everyone present. Ryan and Cooper, still trembling from their earlier mistake, could barely breathe. They felt insignificant, small, almost invisible in the presence of someone they had underestimated so completely. Captain Douglas leaned back slightly in his chair, studying the woman before him. His initial reaction of polite curiosity had already evolved into disbelief. There were few occasions in his career when a visitor could silence him, but this woman, this calm, unassuming figure, had done exactly that. For a heartbeat, he simply stared. Then recognition dawned, sudden and absolute. His eyes widened. His hand rose automatically, almost as if moved by muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Fleet Admiral Monroe, ma'am, he exclaimed, the words reverberating through the office. Ryan and Cooper froze, eyes wide. The name alone carried a gravity they had never encountered in any classroom or drill field. Fleet Admiral? They repeated silently, their minds struggling to comprehend the implication. The woman Monroe stood perfectly still, returning the salute with precise elegance, her expression calm yet commanding. It wasn't the kind of salute performed out of formality alone. It carried decades of experience, authority earned through courage, strategy, and leadership at the highest level. She was no stranger to the cadets or the captain. They were simply witnessing the visible manifestation of her legacy. The room fell into near silence, the only sound the faint ticking of a clock on the wall. Ryan and Cooper exchanged a glance, the gravity of their actions settling heavily on their shoulders. Their prank, their curiosity, their arrogance, all of it seemed trivial now. They had interrupted not just a visit, but the personal space of someone who had shaped naval history. Captain Douglas, regaining his composure, leaned forward, his voice now steady but tinged with awe. Fleet Admiral, we weren't expecting your visit. He faltered, searching for words adequate to honor the presence before him. It's an incredible honor. Admiral Monroe inclined her head slightly. Captain Douglas, I trust the Academy continues to maintain its standards of discipline and respect, she said, her tone firm yet warm. There was no reprimand in her voice for the cadets yet, but the air seemed to demand recognition of the incident that had just occurred. Ryan swallowed hard. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words seemed inadequate. He had peered into a bag that carried a legacy of service beyond imagination. His imagination couldn't match reality, and his words would fail to convey his remorse. Cooper's posture mirrored his, rigid with awe, every instinct telling him to remain silent. Monroe finally addressed the cadets. "You've just witnessed a lesson far beyond the classroom," she said softly. "Respect is not given because of appearances. Authority is not measured by who wears a uniform today. What matters is integrity, discipline, and the courage to earn and maintain it through action." The captain nodded, clearly aware of the weight of her presence on his cadets. "Yes, ma'am," he replied. "They understand now." Ryan couldn't help but steal a glance at the duffel bag resting against Monroe's desk. What they had taken lightly, what they had thought might be an object of curiosity was, in truth, a symbol of decades of service. The metal case gleamed faintly in the morning light, a silent testimony to missions accomplished, decisions made under unimaginable pressure, and lives led with unwavering dedication. Admiral Monroe glanced at the captain. "Ensure these cadets grasp the lessons of respect, humility, and integrity today. Their growth depends on it." Douglas nodded solemnly. "It will be done, ma'am." The cadets remained frozen, absorbing the reality of the moment. The woman they had mistakenly judged, whom they had invaded in thought and curiosity, was the highest-ranking officer in the fleet. She had commanded ships, fleets, and entire operations across oceans. The weight of that responsibility was now tangible in the room, pressing on them with quiet authority. Monroe turned slightly, surveying the cadets with a measured gaze. Her voice, calm yet piercing, cut through the tension. "Do you understand what it means to serve with honor, even when no one sees? To carry responsibility for lives, missions, and the reputation of the service itself?" Ryan nodded, unable to speak. Cooper's eyes brimmed with a mixture of fear and awe. This was a lesson unlike any they had received. It wasn't about rules, punishment, or hierarchy. It was about understanding the essence of duty, leadership, and respect. The captain finally broke the silence. "Fleet Admiral, would you care to brief the cadets on your journey?" "I think it will be invaluable." Monroe's expression softened, the sharp lines of command giving way to the wisdom of experience. She began to speak not as a figure of intimidation, but as a mentor, a leader whose life had been defined by the very values the Academy sought to instill. "I was once a cadet here," she began, voice steady and deliberate. "I, too, was underestimated. I was dismissed by some, overlooked by others, and doubted for the choices I made. But I learned that leadership isn't about being recognized. It's about doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. I rose through the ranks not because of privilege, but because of persistence, discipline, and integrity." The cadets listened, riveted. Every word carried the weight of experience and the authority of someone who had earned respect through decades of service. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the grandeur of her accomplishments filled every corner. "You may think authority is a matter of rank or uniform," she continued, "but real authority comes from knowledge, skill, judgment, and the courage to make difficult decisions. Every action you take, every choice you make, defines your character. Remember that, always." Ryan and Cooper, standing side by side, exchanged glances. Their earlier sense of mischief had been replaced by humility. They felt an unfamiliar but profound respect, not just for the uniform she could wear, but for the life she had led, the decisions she had made, and the responsibility she had shouldered. Monroe's gaze softened as she looked at them directly. "Curiosity is valuable," but respect is essential. When you approach the unknown, do so with care. Honor those who came before you, and those who lead, even when their presence is not obvious. Captain Douglas finally spoke, breaking the reverent silence. Fleet Admiral, the cadets will take your words to heart. I'll ensure they understand the depth of this lesson. Monroe inclined her head. Good, that is all I ask. The cadets stepped back, still shaken, their minds racing. The morning had begun as ordinary, routine even, but it had transformed into a profound lesson in respect and humility. They had glimpsed greatness, misjudged it, and been corrected, not with anger, but with wisdom and dignity. Outside the office, the academy continued its rhythm drills, commands, and footsteps echoing through the halls, but Ryan and Cooper felt as if the world itself had shifted. They had learned that authority and greatness are not always visible, and respect must be given even when recognition is not demanded. As the Fleet Admiral stood, surveying the room one last time before turning to the captain, the cadets knew that this encounter would remain etched in their memories forever. The woman in plain clothes, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag, had revealed more than her rank. She had revealed the essence of true leadership, the weight of service, and the quiet power of integrity. For Ryan and Cooper, the lesson was clear. Misjudgment had consequences. Humility was invaluable, and greatness often appears where least expected. And in that moment, they understood, fully and irrevocably, why the captain had saluted without hesitation, and why the world of the Navy was forever changed by the presence of Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe. The office remained silent after the captain's salute, and Monroe's calm authority settled the room. The cadets, Ryan and Cooper, still struggled to process the revelation of her rank. Their minds reeled, not just at the title, but at the aura of experience, discipline, and dignity that seemed to fill the room. They had only expected a mysterious visitor, perhaps a former officer on a routine inspection, and instead, they were standing before the first female fleet admiral in U.S. naval history. Monroe's eyes softened as she surveyed the two cadets, reading the mix of awe, fear, and curiosity on their faces. She took a measured breath, letting the tension linger for a moment before speaking. "I suppose you want to know who I am," she began, her voice calm, steady, yet commanding enough to draw every thought in the room to her words. The cadets nodded, speechless. Captain Douglas remained silent, allowing her to lead the conversation. "I was once a cadet at this very academy," she said, gesturing subtly at the polished floors, the historical plaques, and the framed photographs lining the walls. "I remember walking these halls as a young woman, ambitious, determined, but constantly underestimated. Back then, women in command were rare, and we faced skepticism at every turn, not just from peers, but sometimes even from instructors." Ryan felt a lump form in his throat. He had assumed Monroe had risen quickly because of exceptional talent or some form of privilege. Hearing her describe the constant obstacles, the disbelief she faced, humbled him instantly. Cooper's eyes widened, imagining the challenges she must have endured. Monroe continued, her voice tinged with the faintest edge of nostalgia, but no bitterness. "I faced resistance, ridicule, and doubt. I had to work twice as hard, be twice as vigilant, and prove myself in ways that most never had to. Every task, every drill, every decision carried extra scrutiny simply because of my gender. And yet, I persevered not out of pride, but out of an unwavering belief that service demands dedication, not excuses." Captain Douglas watched the cadets carefully. He could see their expressions changing. Where there had been mischief, there was now a profound respect. Where there had been arrogance, there was now humility. Monroe's story was more than history. It was a mirror for them, reflecting the qualities they might one day be tested on themselves. "I rose through the ranks one assignment at a time," she continued. From my first command at sea to strategic positions in fleet operations, every decision I made had consequences beyond myself. Lives depended on those decisions, and mistakes were not permitted. The responsibility was immense, but it was never about recognition. It was always about duty. Ryan swallowed hard. He could hardly imagine the pressure of commanding even a single ship, let alone an entire fleet. Cooper's mind raced, picturing the logistics, the strategy, and the human lives entwined in every decision Monroe described. I was appointed Fleet Admiral not because of notoriety, or because I sought power, but because my record demonstrated discipline, judgment, and integrity, she said, her eyes meeting theirs with piercing clarity. I earned that rank, step by step, through service, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to my crew, my country, and the principles I swore to uphold. She paused briefly, letting the cadets absorb her words. The room felt almost reverent, as if the weight of her experiences hung invisibly in the air. Ryan and Cooper were no longer thinking about their prank. They were thinking about the magnitude of responsibility, the courage it took to endure doubt, and the perseverance required to achieve greatness. Monroe reached into her bag, retrieving a folded flag and a small engraved case. These items, she said, holding them carefully, represent the missions, the victories, and the sacrifices of those who served before me and alongside me. They are tangible reminders that leadership is not about titles, it is about accountability, honor, and the trust placed in you by others. She set them gently on the desk, each movement deliberate and reverent. The cadets who entered this office today did not recognize what they were handling, she continued. But this moment is a lesson in itself. True leadership, like these symbols, may appear ordinary on the surface. But underneath lies responsibility, history, and the weight of those who depend on you. Ryan swallowed hard, realizing that their curiosity had exposed them to something far greater than they could have anticipated. They had violated a private space, yes, but in doing so, they had been confronted with the embodiment of excellence and integrity. Cooper felt a similar mix of guilt and admiration. Monroe's gaze softened further. I came here unannounced to observe the academy not for inspection alone, but to see if the next generation of officers can recognize integrity when it walks past them in plain clothes. Your actions today have shown me both the challenges we face as young leaders and the capacity for growth when humility is embraced. Captain Douglas nodded silently. He understood that this visit would leave a lasting impression on the cadets, far beyond any standard training or lecture. Monroe's presence, her story, and her calm authority were teaching lessons that could never be written in a textbook. You may think leadership is about commanding attention, Monroe said, her voice steady, resonant. It is not. Leadership is about earning trust, making the hard decisions, and acting with honor even when no one is watching. It is about guiding others with patience, courage, and wisdom. She paused, letting the weight of her message settle. Your curiosity today was understandable, but it must be tempered with respect. Respect for your fellow cadets, for those who came before you, and for those who lead. When you fail to respect these principles, you endanger not just your reputation, but the mission, the crew, and the institution itself. Ryan nodded slowly, feeling the depth of her lesson pressing into his consciousness. Cooper's jaw tightened, but he too understood. They had been taught far more than discipline. They had been taught the essence of leadership, service, and character. Monroe smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and encouragement. I did not come here to reprimand you. I came here to show you what true leadership looks like, to remind you that greatness is earned, and to challenge you to rise to the standard set by those who came before you. Let this encounter shape the officers you aspire to become. The cadets stood silently, absorbing every word. The morning sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the polished floor. It illuminated the duffel bag, the folded flag, and the engraved case symbols of a lifetime of service, quietly teaching lessons that no classroom could convey. Monroe's eyes lingered on Ryan and Cooper for a final moment. "Carry this lesson forward," she said softly. "And remember that respect, humility, and integrity are the true markers of a leader. Titles can be earned, uniforms worn, and medals displayed, but the heart of leadership is invisible to the eye." Captain Douglas cleared his throat, signaling the gravity of the moment. "Thank you, Fleet Admiral, for sharing your story. I know these cadets will never forget it." Monroe inclined her head slightly, her expression serene but commanding. "Good. Then our time here has served its purpose." The cadets, still awed, finally found their voices. "Thank you, ma'am," Ryan whispered. Cooper echoed the sentiment in silence, feeling the words in his chest more than on his lips. As the Fleet Admiral stood, preparing to move on, the cadets knew that the encounter had changed them irrevocably. They had seen the embodiment of excellence, courage, and service in a woman who had risen through obstacles that seemed insurmountable. They had glimpsed a life of leadership, defined not by ego or ambition, but by integrity, sacrifice, and unwavering duty. In that quiet moment, Ryan and Cooper understood the full weight of Admiral Monroe's presence. They had not just met a visitor, they had met a living lesson, a testament to the power of perseverance, and a reminder that true respect is earned through action, not assumed through appearances. And as she walked toward the door, ready to continue her inspection of the academy, the cadets knew they would carry this lesson with them forever, the lesson of Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe, whose life and service had redefined the very meaning of leadership. The morning at the U.S. Naval Academy had begun like any other routine drills, marching cadets, and the crisp clang of brass instruments, but it had taken a turn that no one could have anticipated. Ryan and Cooper, once mischief-driven cadets, now stood in the presence of Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe, absorbing lessons far beyond the usual curriculum. After sharing her personal journey, Monroe motioned for the two cadets to follow her to the Academy's training grounds. Captain Douglas remained behind, watching the exchange silently, recognizing that this experiential lesson would leave a deeper impact than any lecture or demerit could. "Cadets," Monroe began as they walked, "leadership is not learned from a book. It is forged in action, discipline, and respect for both those you command and those who command you. Today, you have seen a glimpse of that." Ryan swallowed hard. The memory of rifling through her duffel bag still lingered, a source of embarrassment and awe. Cooper's posture was rigid, but he followed closely, every step a reminder that authority could be silent, powerful, and commanding without a single raised voice. Monroe stopped near the edge of the parade field, the morning sun glinting off the brass buttons of the cadets who continued their drills nearby. She gestured toward them. "Observe," she said. "Discipline is visible, yes, but it is meaningless without understanding. Every action has purpose. Every step, every command, and every response carries weight. Leadership is measured not by how loudly you command, but by how effectively you inspire and guide." Ryan's mind raced. He had marched in perfect cadence countless times, but he had never considered the deeper meaning behind each drill, each command, each ordered maneuver. Monroe's words transformed routine actions into lessons in responsibility, respect, and awareness. "Leadership is also about anticipation," she continued. "A good officer predicts challenges, understands the capabilities of their team, and responds decisively. But it is not enough to act decisively. One must act justly. Decisions carry consequences that extend beyond the individual. They impact the crew, the mission, and the lives entrusted to you." Cooper, who had always been meticulous in following orders, now understood that obedience alone was insufficient. True leadership required judgment, empathy, and accountability. He glanced at Ryan, seeing the same realization mirrored in his friend's eyes. Monroe paused, letting her words settle in the cadets' minds. Then she placed her hand lightly on her duffel bag, still a symbol of decades of service. "This bag," she said, "contains more than papers and medals. It contains history, experience, and the weight of responsibility. Leaders carry such burdens every day. You may not yet command a fleet, but you will carry responsibility for decisions, actions, and lives from this day forward. Never underestimate that responsibility." Ryan shivered slightly. He had thought leadership was about authority, rank, and appearances. Now he understood that it was about integrity, humility, and the courage to do what was right, even when it went unnoticed. "Respect is the foundation of all effective leadership," Monroe added, her voice steady and unwavering. "It is earned through actions, reinforced by integrity, and demonstrated by consistency. Disrespect or arrogance erodes trust. A leader who cannot inspire respect cannot lead effectively. Today, you learned it the hard way." Cooper nodded slowly. The lesson stung, but it was essential. Their previous arrogance had been replaced with a cautious awareness and a budding determination to improve. Monroe gestured to a nearby obstacle course. "Leadership is also about example. Watch, learn, and then lead. The exercises you perform are not just physical tests, they are mental, moral, and ethical tests. Your cadets, peers, and subordinates will follow your lead. Ensure your actions merit their trust." Ryan and Cooper exchanged a glance. This was no longer about punishment or embarrassment. It was an opportunity to internalize principles that would guide them for the rest of their naval careers. The Admiral began walking the cadets through each station on the course, demonstrating techniques, correcting posture, and explaining the significance of each drill. But it wasn't physical prowess she emphasized. It was focus, presence, and decision-making. "When you are under pressure," Monroe said as Ryan hesitated at a balance beam, "you must remain calm. Panic is contagious. Composure is infectious. A leader who loses control jeopardizes everyone under their command. You must internalize calm and clarity before acting." Ryan took a deep breath, centering himself as Monroe had instructed. Step by step, he crossed the beam, guided by her words, feeling the metaphorical weight of leadership with each careful movement. Cooper followed, steady and determined, realizing that physical obstacles mirrored the ethical and strategic challenges of command. Monroe stopped at the top of a high wall, overlooking the training ground. "From this perspective, everything appears different," she said. "Leadership is perspective. Understanding the viewpoints of others, recognizing the consequences of your decisions, and anticipating the ripple effects of your actions. These are the hallmarks of an effective officer." The cadets listened intently, absorbing her every word. This was no longer a lesson about a bag, or a prank, or even a single moment of curiosity. This was a comprehensive lesson on leadership, responsibility, and the moral weight of authority. "You must also recognize your limitations," Monroe continued. "No leader is infallible. Acknowledging mistakes, learning from them, and guiding others despite personal flaws is a true measure of courage and strength. Arrogance blinds. Humility illuminates." Ryan thought back to the moment he and Cooper had rifled through her bag. That act, small as it seemed, had revealed the importance of humility in ways he had never imagined. Cooper felt the same, understanding that respect was not optional, it was essential. Finally, Monroe gathered the cadets for one last reflection. Leadership is not about the uniform you wear, the medals you display, or the authority you command in the eyes of others. Leadership is about the quiet choices you make, the trust you inspire, and the integrity you maintain when no one is watching. This is what I carry every day, and what I expect you to carry as future officers." The cadets, standing beneath the bright morning sun, felt a profound shift within themselves. The earlier embarrassment, fear, and awe had coalesced into understanding, determination, and a desire to rise to the standard set before them. Monroe's final words echoed in their minds. "Carry respect, integrity, and humility with you. Let these principles guide your actions, define your leadership, and shape your legacy. Do this, and you will honor not just your predecessors, but yourselves, your crew, and the nation you serve." As the cadets walked back to the academy buildings, Ryan whispered to Cooper, I think I finally understand. Leadership isn't about showing off. It's about responsibility, respect, and doing what's right." Cooper nodded, a determined fire in his eyes. "Yeah, and we just got a masterclass from the best." The duffel bag, still in Monroe's care, had become more than a vessel of personal effects. It was a symbol, a catalyst for change, and a silent reminder of the lessons they would carry forward. That morning, the cadets had not just learned about leadership, they had experienced it firsthand. And as Admiral Monroe watched them walk away, she knew that the seeds of understanding had been planted. The cadets had glimpsed the true essence of command, and she had imparted lessons that would shape the leaders they were destined to become. The sun had climbed higher over the academy grounds, illuminating the meticulously maintained parade fields and the cadets running drills with crisp precision. Ryan and Cooper walked beside each other, each step heavier than usual, not with fatigue, but with thoughtfulness. The lessons imparted by Admiral Monroe were no longer abstract. They weighed on their minds, demanding to be integrated into action. Captain Douglas had called them aside earlier, his tone serious. "Cadets, Admiral Monroe has set a standard. Today, you will be tested not on physical skill, but on judgment, integrity, and leadership under pressure. The exercise is simple, a team scenario simulating a crisis aboard a ship. Your responses will reflect what you've learned this morning." Ryan and Cooper exchanged a nervous glance. This was more than a drill. It was a proving ground, an opportunity to see if they could live up to Monroe's lessons. The other cadets, unaware of the magnitude of what Ryan and Cooper had just experienced, approached with routine confidence, unaware that these two were carrying a newfound perspective. The exercise began with a simulated emergency aboard a naval vessel. The scenario was complex, a critical system failure during a storm at sea. The cadets were assigned roles, tasked with maintaining order, managing resources, and ensuring the safety of their crew under pressure. Ryan found himself in charge of navigation decisions. His hands shook slightly as he received reports from his peers, recalling Monroe's words. Leadership is about anticipation. Decisions carry consequences beyond the individual. He swallowed hard, centering himself, and issued calm, clear instructions. Cooper was responsible for communications and crew coordination. He had always been meticulous, but now he felt the added weight of responsibility. Every decision, every instruction, carried potential consequences for the simulated lives on the deck. Monroe's teachings echoed in his mind. Panic is contagious. Composure is infectious. The storm intensified, simulated sirens blaring, wind machines shaking the mock deck. A critical error threatened to topple the scenario into chaos. A miscommunication from one of the cadets meant that essential supplies were misrouted. Ryan instinctively acted, delegating tasks efficiently, ensuring every team member knew their role. Cooper reinforced instructions, correcting errors without assigning blame. Monroe, observing from a safe distance, watched silently, her arms crossed. She did not intervene. This was their moment to apply the lessons she had imparted. She had seen countless cadets before them fail this test, letting panic or arrogance dictate their actions. Today, however, she hoped that Ryan and Cooper's recent insights would guide them differently. Ryan's mind worked methodically, prioritizing safety and efficiency over personal recognition. He delegated calmly, repeated instructions clearly, and monitored every response. The chaos of the storm raged around him, yet he maintained composure, a steady anchor for those around him. Cooper's role was equally critical. He had to ensure communication remained clear, morale stayed high, and no cadet faltered under stress. He remembered Monroe's words about humility and accountability. When a fellow cadet made a mistake, he corrected it tactfully, reinforcing teamwork rather than criticism. Minutes felt like hours. The storm was relentless, the pressure immense. Every decision had potential consequences, and every error could cascade into disaster. Yet Ryan and Cooper pressed forward, guided by the lessons of respect, integrity, and leadership they had learned only hours earlier. Then came the final challenge. A simulated breach in the hull, threatening flooding of the main deck. Panic threatened to spread among the cadets, but Ryan took a deep breath, remembering Monroe's advice about calm under pressure. He coordinated teams to contain the flooding, issue warnings, and maintain morale. Cooper communicated instructions clearly, ensuring every team member understood their role and felt empowered to act decisively. Monroe's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in assessment. She had seen the panic in countless cadets before, had seen them crumble under pressure or lash out in blame. But these two, Ryan and Cooper, were different. They were applying principles, not just following orders. They were thinking, acting, and leading with integrity. As the storm simulation concluded, the exercise evaluators noted the exceptional teamwork and decision-making displayed by Ryan and Cooper. Every error was mitigated, every risk managed, and the crew remained safe and functional. Their peers, who had initially dismissed them as inexperienced, looked on with admiration. Monroe finally stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate attention. The storm noise faded as the cadets turned to face her. "Cadets," she said, voice calm yet filled with authority, "this is the essence of leadership. Your decisions, your composure, and your respect for those around you determine outcomes far beyond yourself. Today, you have demonstrated growth, understanding, and integrity." Ryan felt a mixture of relief and pride. This wasn't about personal accolades. It was about doing the right thing under pressure. Cooper's chest swelled with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from proving oneself not through arrogance, but through action and judgment. Monroe's eyes lingered on them for a moment longer. Leadership is not just about action, it's about influence. You've influenced your peers positively today. That is far more important than individual recognition. Never forget that the measure of an officer is the impact they have on those they lead and the trust they inspire. The cadets nodded, absorbing the magnitude of her words. This was no ordinary training exercise. It was a reflection of real-life responsibility, a test of character, and a validation of the principles Monroe had instilled earlier that morning. Captain Douglas approached the Admiral, visibly impressed. "Fleet Admiral, their performance exceeded expectations. The cadets followed your principles rather than merely completing the exercise." Monroe inclined her head slightly. "That is good. Let them understand that leadership is a continuous journey. Today's success is only meaningful if the lessons carry forward. They must apply them consistently, even when no one is observing." Ryan and Cooper, standing side by side, shared a glance. The pride they felt was tempered by humility. They had learned that leadership was not about ego or recognition. It was about responsibility, composure, and respect. Every action mattered, and every decision could have profound consequences. As Monroe prepared to leave the training ground, she offered a final reflection. "Remember, cadets, authority is not always visible, and greatness is not always announced. Carry this lesson into every assignment, every drill, and every challenge you face. Let integrity, humility, and respect guide your decisions. That is the true mark of an officer. The cadets watched in awe as she walked away, the duffel bag at her side, a silent symbol of decades of service and sacrifice. They had experienced not just a lesson in discipline, but a living example of leadership under pressure. Ryan whispered to Cooper, voice barely audible over the fading sounds of the exercise. "I never imagined leadership could feel this real." Cooper nodded, eyes fixed on the Admiral's retreating figure. "Yeah, it's more than orders or drills. It's about responsibility and respect." The storm simulation had ended, but the lessons it imparted lingered. Ryan and Cooper had been tested not just in skill, but in character. They had faced a challenge that mirrored the real pressures of command, and they had emerged transformed, humble, focused, and ready to lead with the principles they had just internalized. As they returned to the academy buildings, the weight of the day pressed upon them, not burdensome, but enlightening. They understood now that every decision, every command, and every interaction was an opportunity to demonstrate leadership. And they knew, without a doubt, that the lessons of Fleet Admiral Monroe would shape them for the rest of their careers. The afternoon sun had begun to soften, casting long shadows across the Naval Academy grounds. The storm simulation was over, the drills had ended, and the cadets were returning to their quarters. But for Ryan and Cooper, the day was far from ordinary. They walked in silence, each step heavy with reflection, their minds replaying the lessons of Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe. The adrenaline of the exercise had faded, leaving room for thought, understanding, and humility. For the first time, Ryan realized that leadership was not about recognition, awards, or even rank. It was about responsibility, integrity, and the trust others placed in you. Cooper, equally absorbed, understood that respect could not be assumed or demanded. It had to be earned through actions and decisions guided by principle. Captain Douglas approached them quietly, a rare softness in his gaze. "Cadets," he said, "today you faced more than a drill. You faced a test of character, and from what I observed, you passed. Not perfectly, but with insight, humility, and determination." Ryan nodded, swallowing hard. "Yes, sir, I understand now, sir. Leadership isn't about showing off or thinking you're in charge. It's about responsibility, sir." Cooper's voice was steadier, though equally humble. "We learned that respect is earned, and decisions carry consequences beyond ourselves." Captain Douglas smiled faintly, a rare warmth breaking through his usual stoicism. "Good. That is the lesson most cadets fail to grasp. Today, you not only survived the exercise, you demonstrated the potential to become officers who can lead with integrity." The cadets glanced back toward the training grounds, where Admiral Monroe's figure had already disappeared toward her next appointment. Her presence had left an indelible mark. For Ryan and Cooper, the woman in plain clothes, carrying nothing but her duffel bag, had become a symbol of everything they aspired to be: calm, decisive, humble, and principled. Ryan finally spoke, voice tinged with awe. "I can't believe we didn't recognize her earlier. I mean, we just assumed she was someone ordinary, carrying a bag like that." Cooper nodded, shaking his head. "We judged her before we even knew her. That was our biggest mistake. And she made sure we understood it." The words hung in the air, heavy with realization. The cadets had learned humility the hard way, but the lesson was unforgettable. They would carry it with them through every challenge, every drill, and every mission they undertook in the future. Later that evening, after debriefing and returning to their quarters, Ryan and Cooper sat quietly in the empty hallway, reflecting on the day. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the academy bathed in golden light. They spoke little at first, letting the weight of their experience settle. I think I finally understand why she became Fleet Admiral, Ryan said softly. It wasn't just skill or intelligence. It was patience, humility, and the ability to earn respect quietly, without showing off. Cooper nodded. Yeah, she carried decades of responsibility, and somehow made us understand, in a few hours, what leadership really means. It's not just orders or medals, it's integrity and trust. Ryan chuckled faintly, a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. And to think we rummaged through her bag without a clue. We literally held history in our hands, and didn't even realize it. Cooper smirked. We messed up big time. But maybe that was the point. We had to make the mistake to really learn. The following morning, news of the exercise and the cadets' performance spread quietly through the academy. Ryan and Cooper were no longer the mischievous cadets. They were cadets who had faced a test of character and emerged with newfound understanding. Their peers regarded them differently, though not with jealousy or fear, but with respect. They had learned the lesson that extended beyond the walls of the academy. Captain Douglas addressed the cadets at the daily assembly. Yesterday's exercise wasn't just about procedure or technical skill. It was about judgment, integrity, and the capacity to lead under pressure. I have observed cadets who rose to the occasion, particularly Ryan and Cooper, demonstrating the qualities that make an officer worthy of respect. The announcement sparked quiet murmurs among the cadets. Ryan and Cooper exchanged glances, still processing the reality that their growth had been recognized, not for their past misbehavior, but for their efforts to embody the principles they had learned from Monroe. Days later, a letter arrived addressed to Captain Douglas. It was brief but profoundly meaningful. It read, "Cadets Ryan and Cooper have shown the potential for leadership, humility, and integrity. Continue to guide them wisely, and they will serve the Navy well. Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe." Ryan held the letter in his hands, a mixture of pride and humility washing over him. "We really learned from the best," he said quietly. Cooper nodded, unable to find words that could capture the depth of their gratitude and awe. Over the following weeks, the cadets applied the lessons they had learned in every exercise, drill, and interaction. They noticed how effective calm composure could be, how respectful communication fostered trust, and how responsibility, even small decisions, carried weight. Their transformation did not go unnoticed by instructors or peers alike. Months later, Ryan and Cooper stood once more on the academy parade grounds, participating in a graduation drill. They moved with confidence, precision, and awareness, carrying the invisible lessons of integrity, respect, and leadership imparted by Fleet Admiral Monroe. Ryan glanced at Cooper, whispering, "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" Cooper smiled faintly. "I think she already is. And we're just getting started." The cadets knew that the lessons of that morning, the lessons of humility, integrity, and quiet authority would guide them for the rest of their lives. The duffel bag, once a symbol of mystery and misjudgment, had become a symbol of wisdom, courage, and the weight of leadership. As the sun rose on the academy, illuminating the polished fields and the disciplined lines of cadets, Ryan and Cooper understood the ultimate lesson of Fleet Admiral Elizabeth Monroe. Greatness is not always announced. Respect is not always demanded, and true leadership is defined not by appearances, but by integrity, perseverance, and the quiet strength to do what is right, even when no one is watching. In the years to come, they would face challenges, crises, and decisions that tested their judgment and character. But the memory of Monroe's calm authority, the lessons learned from her story, and the storm simulation would guide them through each trial. They had been given a rare gift, a first-hand experience of what it meant to lead with honor, humility, and courage. And as they marched in perfect cadence, side by side, the legacy of Fleet Admiral Monroe followed them, a reminder that the path of leadership is never easy. always demanding, and eternally defined by those who choose to carry it with integrity. Ryan and Cooper would never forget the day the cadets rummaged through a bag and froze in awe. The day they learned that true authority is quiet but undeniable. And the day they discovered that leadership is a legacy, one that must be earned, respected, and preserved. The academy continued its rhythm, its drills and routines uninterrupted, but the world of Ryan and Cooper had changed forever. They had glimpsed greatness, learned humility, and discovered the true meaning of leadership. And they would carry that knowledge with them, shaping their own legacies in the Navy for years to come.